Congratulations on taking a very large step and signing a contract for housing with Matchbox Realty. In the next few minutes, you'll hear a summary of your lease terms. Prior to signing your lease, make sure that you understand all of the terms that are in your lease. This is a Virginia Realtor's residential lease. The top section of page 1 lists the landlord, tenant, and shows that Matchbox is the landlord's broker and represents the landlord in this transaction. Paragraph 1, section 1 is a summary of your lease terms. 1A shows the address of the property you are leasing. 1B shows the start and end date of your lease. Please note that all of our leases begin and end at noon on the specified date. C gives the address where you will send your rent. However, please note that online payments are more convenient and the preferred method of payment. D gives a description of your dwelling unit. E has to do with any appliances or other personal property provided in the property. F has to do with the occupancy by anyone who is not a tenant. 1G states who is to pay for what utilities. 1H has to do with rent. You will see rent and fees spelled out in this section of your lease. 1I details the amount of your security deposit. 1J is a summary of the cancellation and renewal clause of your lease. This section allows either party, the tenant or the landlord, to serve notice that they will not renew the lease at the end of the term. If neither party gives notice to the other that they will not be renewing the lease, then that lease will automatically renew for a 1-year period. Let me repeat that. If neither party gives notice to the other that they will not be renewing the lease, then the lease will automatically renew for a 1-year period. Section 2 shows that the landlord-tenant relationship will be according to the Virginia Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. Section 3 details what your security deposit may be used for, the amount of time we have to disperse the security deposit once your lease term ends, and how we get your security deposit back to you. Section 4 details rent, late fees, and the fees associated with any return payments. All rent payments are due on the 1st of the month. Any payments made after the 1st are considered late. However, there is a grace period that extends until 5 p.m. on the 5th of each month, and late fees are applied to any payments not received by 5 p.m. on the 5th of the month. Again, rent is due on the 1st, and late fees are applied to any and all payments received after 5 p.m. on the 5th of the month. Section 5 details what the move-in inspection is and contains some additional information regarding locks on your property. You will have 5 days from the time you receive your move-in inspection to return this to us and note any blemishes you see in the dwelling unit so that these will not be held against you at the conclusion of your lease. Section 6 discusses the use, occupancy, and maintenance of your property. 6A, smoking is strictly prohibited in any area of the dwelling unit and the premises. 6B, you are to use the property for residential purposes only and are not to cause physical damage to the property. 6C, no person other than those listed in Section 1F of this lease may occupy the property on a regular basis. 6D, you may not assign or sublet any portion of the property without prior written approval from Matchbox. 6E says that you must comply with all obligations imposed by building and housing codes and shall keep the dwelling unit in good, clean, safe, and sanitary condition. You must also maintain utility services that are your responsibility under this lease during the entire term of your lease. 6F, you must keep all appliances and equipment in good and clean condition. 6G states that you are responsible for reasonable care and maintenance of smoke detectors in the property and for providing written notice to Matchbox of the need for repair of any malfunctioning smoke detector. 6H discusses carbon monoxide detectors. 6I states that you are responsible to maintain the dwelling unit in such a condition as to prevent accumulation of moisture and growth of mold, and to promptly notify landlord in writing of any moisture accumulation that occurs or any visible evidence of mold that you discover. 6J addresses trash and says that you must obtain appropriate receptacles for trash. 6K says that you are to keep the dwelling unit free from insects and pests and promptly notify Matchbox of the existence of any insects or pests. This section also states that you will be financially responsible for any added cost caused by any unreasonable delay in you notifying us of the existence of any insects or pests. 6L, you may not paint or disturb any painted surface without written approval from Matchbox. 6M, reinforces that you shall comply with all obligations under the Virginia Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. 6N discusses some additional obligations imposed on the landlord. Section 7 reiterates the location in the lease that shows what utilities you are responsible for, and again, make sure that you understand that you must keep all utilities on that you're responsible for during the entire term of your lease. Section 8 details the responsibilities related to your personal property that you bring onto the premises. You must obtain renter's insurance, and all personal property that you place on or about the premises is brought onto the premises at your own risk. This section also explains how we handle abandoned property and what we are to do with the personal property of a deceased tenant. Section 9 details the circumstances in which we can enter your property after giving proper notice and requires you to give us notice if there is to be an extended absence in excess of 7 days from the dwelling unit. Section 10 discusses what happens if we cannot, for some reason unrelated to Matchbox, deliver possession of the premises to you on the commencement date of your lease. Section 11 details the rights of each party should there be significant damage or other casualty to the property. Depending on the extent of the casualty, there are rights of repair and or termination depending on the extent of the damage. Section 12 states that if the property is acquired by a public authority through eminent domain, then this lease shall terminate. Section 13 discusses the liability of landlord and agent under a number of different scenarios. Section 14 states that no animals of any kind may be kept on the premises without our written permission. Section 15 says that you may be liable and we may terminate this lease for any misleading, incorrect, untrue, or omitted information in your application. Section 16 discusses where responsibility lies if the landlord is required to make any payment to you. Section 17 talks about how we are to give notice to one another. Our preferred method of delivering any notice to you is through email. Section 18 details some additional rights and terms that any military service member has under this lease. We here at Matchbox thank you for your service. Section 19 gives additional detail regarding the cancellation or renewal of this lease. As a reminder, either party, the tenant or landlord, has the right not to renew the lease beyond the initial term. Also, as a reminder, if neither party gives notice to the other, the lease will automatically renew for a 1-year period. Section 20 details the circumstances that are a breach of your lease and the steps we can go through to remove you from the property if you have violated the terms of your lease. Section 21 details how we go about obtaining possession of the property after a breach of the lease, and that we can accept rent with reservation and proceed with the court process to obtain possession. Section 22 says that if we have let you slide on one term of this lease, it does not mean we will let you slide on any other term of this lease. Section 23 states that this lease is subordinate to any lien, future deed of trust, or mortgage placed on the property. Section 24 says that if any provision of this lease violates law or equity, the remaining provisions shall remain in full force. Section 25 states that the landlord and agent shall not discriminate against tenant in the provisions of services or any other manner on the basis of any protected class under federal, state, or local fair housing law or regulations, or the Realtor Code of Ethics. Section 26 says that should we need to employ parties to enforce any provision of this lease, you will be responsible for reasonable attorney's fees and costs in all courts of competent jurisdiction. Section 27 discusses the rules and regulations that are attached to and made part of this lease. You will hear much more about that in detail in a few minutes. Section 28 says that if you do not vacate the property at the end of your lease, you will become a holdover tenant. This paragraph outlines the amounts you could be responsible for should you not vacate the property at the proper time. Section 29 states that this lease cannot be modified except in writing signed by both parties, and shall be construed, interpreted, and applied according to Virginia law, and shall be binding on the heirs, personal representatives, successors, assignees, and subtenants of the parties. Section 30 states that tenant shall exercise whatever due diligence tenant deems necessary with respect to information concerning sex offenders registered under Chapter 23 of Title 19. Section 31 says that should you be adjudicated as bankrupt, this lease, at our option, may be terminated. Section 32 discusses non-binding mediation. Section 33 is very important. This is the section where any specific provisions of your lease will be detailed. Make sure you read and understand the provisions in this section carefully prior to signing your lease. Section 34 has to do with some optional provisions which may or may not apply to your lease. Section 35 clearly states that Matchbox Realty represents the landlord, not you the tenant, in this transaction. Section 36 has to do with your waiver of the homestead exemption laws under the Commonwealth of Virginia. Section 37 says that as long as this section is initialed, then both parties agree to the use of electronic signatures. Below Section 37 is where you and a licensed representative from Matchbox Realty will sign the lease and will then have a legally binding contract.
Right now I want to speak to you about some of the special addendums that you may be signing with your lease, as well as the rules and regulations at a later point. The first one we'll talk to you about is the addendum to the lease agreement. So if applicable, your property manager may include an addendum to the lease agreement. This document states the number of bedrooms, the number of tenants, and what percentage each tenant is responsible for. Please note that you may still be required to produce a guarantee of lease prior to the commencement date of your lease. Turnover maintenance agreement. If one or more tenant in a unit has renewed, your property manager will include a turnover maintenance agreement. This states that there will be no turnover maintenance, maid service, carpet cleaning, painting, or rekey of the locks. Please keep in mind that this agreement is contingent upon what is written in other specific provisions of your lease. Generally, this is an as-is clause, allowing 10 days from the start date of your lease to report in writing any specific damages. Joint lease acknowledgement letter. If applicable, your property manager may include this document. It states the total rent for the entire unit plus the total rent divided by the number of tenants that have signed the lease agreement. Matchbox does not participate in roommate matching, and please know it is a tenant's responsibility to fill bedrooms in the unit. As a reminder, the amount of rent that each tenant is responsible for is contingent upon a guarantee of lease agreement being received by management for each tenant prior to the commencement date. This letter also reiterates joint and several responsibility for damages. Guarantee of lease agreement. If applicable, your property manager may ask that you have a guarantee of lease agreement to accompany your lease agreement. For non-students, this is a pre-qualified guarantor, essentially a cosigner that has met our guarantor application requirements. For students, a parent or guardian will essentially be your guarantor. Individual leases will be in effect once all guarantor forms have been received for the unit prior to commencement date of the lease. Damage addendum. The Virginia Realtors Damage Addendum provides estimates for damages caused by tenants that are over and above reasonable wear and tear. This addendum was made applicable to all Matchbox Realty properties ranging from a studio apartment to a 26-bedroom home, which leads to the most important verbiage on page 2 where it closes, or at actual cost. And now moving on to rules and regulations, and please know that this is one portion of your lease that can change periodically throughout the year. Payments. The payment section of the rules and regulations will give you details on when payments are due, what late fees you may encounter, and basically anything that pertains to making a payment. Keys. In this portion, you will read about when keys can be released, lockout service after hours, and lost and damaged keys. Please be sure to read this thoroughly so you are aware of how this section pertains to you. Routine systems maintenance fee. Tenant pays this non-refundable fee in the amount as stated in your lease at the time you are paying your security deposit. This is a one-time fee and will be used towards common maintenance needs of the community in which you reside. Utilities. Tenants must have their utilities on during the entirety of their lease. This means through the last day of your lease. If you move out early and turn them off, you will be charged to reconnect your utilities. And if the appliance is damaged, you will be charged for the repair or replacement of that appliance. If you are residing in a property where the utilities are charged through Matchbox, the utilities will be placed into the person's name that is alphabetically higher in regards to their last name. Alterations. For some reason, this section scares people, but please know that we want you to make your Matchbox home a home. We just don't want you to turn your walls into pincushions and leave the owner a mess to deal with. Be respectful of their property and do not use anything that will tear the drywall, leave large holes, adhesive residue, or grease spots like poster putty. Take care of the wood floors by covering them with rugs and use felt pads underneath the legs of your furniture to prevent gouging. Do not change locks on your doors without the written permission of your landlord. Original locks must be kept and reinstalled upon exit, and the landlord must have a key to the new door locks within 24 hours. Maintenance. This list is long and vast, but comes through years of helping to mitigate maintenance issues. Please be sure to read through this list and come prepared with filters to change into your new home, a toilet plunger, and basic knowledge of the home that you are coming to move into. Owners will take care of maintenance issues caused by normal wear and tear, but it will be a tenant's responsibility for finances associated with damages caused by tenant neglect, abuse, or disregard. The maintenance section is standard to all communities, but some bullet points will be only applicable to certain communities. If in question, please ask your property manager. Maintenance troubleshooting. This section of rules and regulations is full of suggestions to help answer your common maintenance needs. There are troubleshooting tips on www.harrisonburghousing.com and www.offcampushousing.com in the FAQ section. Before turning in a service issue, check to see if you can solve it yourself first. Disturbances. All tenants have the right to quiet, peaceful enjoyment of their home. If you are found disrupting this right, this clause will explain the process in which you will be fined, warned, or have your lease terminated should you or your guest continue to disturb those around you. Occupancy. This section of rules and regulations informs you about the decisions you make regarding all facets of occupancy. Definitions of party-free communities will be discussed, along with Airbnb rentals, actions of guests, and whose responsibility it is to secure roommates for your lease. Pets. Unauthorized pet fines will be assessed to each tenant on the lease, and this will be per occurrence. A tenant is considered in violation of their lease and shall be responsible for any damages caused by that pet. Pet waste fines are $50 per occurrence. Tenant is responsible for fees associated with trip charges if maintenance cannot gain access due to an unrestrained pet. Inspections and showings. This paragraph will give you clear and concise information regarding inspections and showings of your property and the notice that we will give you should either of these be needed. If you deny access, there are financial penalties, and these are mentioned here as well. Cable and satellite dishes. Satellite dishes are permitted with written permission from landlord and agent. Satellite dishes cannot be mounted to buildings. Satellite dishes must be secured and grounded and are limited to one per dwelling unit. Move out. There is a menagerie of information in this section pertaining to your move out. Please read through this section and know that all sections may not be applicable. If you have questions in regard to your particular move out, please contact your property manager and they can assist you with your property specific information. Sublease assignment. This section will guide you in choices on how to proceed should you decide you cannot fulfill your lease. We do allow sublease or an assignment, but both options must be approved through Matchbox. Both options need a roommate's approval, and each option has their own fee that is relevant to the option that you choose. Each option is very different in definition, so if you are unclear, please contact your property manager. Parking and vehicles. These are very basic guidelines to adhere to in regards to parking. Please know that some properties may have their own parking regulations, and you will be notified of that as you pick up your keys and move in. Any changes in vehicles, status of ownership, and use of temporary vehicles must be communicated to your property manager. Matchbox is not responsible for vehicles towed if not properly permitted. Renewal leases will require new parking passes each year. Prohibited items and trash. Please read this section carefully. Some items listed may seem like common sense, but others may surprise you. These prohibited items were created to protect the owner's property, keep you safe, and allow the community enjoyment of their surroundings. Other. There are a few miscellaneous items in the sections that do not fall in other categories. Communications from Matchbox, releasing of video footage, roommate disputes, guarantor qualifications, and fines pertaining to lease violations will be explained further in this section.
Thank you for choosing Matchbox Realty. We look forward to hosting you this year.